Hey, CALC here, and we have an exciting new firmware update for the Base Station 2. In this video, we're going to take a good look at the 4.14 Base Station 2 firmware update. 4.14 is a huge update and has some really killer features to the synth. Alongside adding fixed envelopes, a new glide diverge, we've also detached the sub-oscillator from the oscillator 1 so it can be independently tuned. This turns Base Station 2 to a true 3-oscillator analog monosynth. We've also been really busy behind the scenes and working with an incredibly exciting collaborator. We've been working with Richard D. James, also known as Aphex Twin, and this has come together to bring us a brand new AFX mode for Base Station 2. Aphex Twin contacted us some time ago with some really cool ideas of how we could develop this synth. And of course, being the synth nerds we are, when that sort of thing happens, we had to listen. Aphex Twin, working alongside our own in-house firmware genius, Matt Speed, have collaborated and created a system that allows you to save an individual sound onto an individual key on the synthesizer. This is essentially AFX mode. AFX mode does a similar thing to sending Base Station program change messages to change the patch in quick succession. But instead of the need for program change messages being sent to Base Station, we can literally have a patch per key on the keyboard. Of course, this can turn Base Station 2 into a really powerful analog drum machine, or just an ever-changing bank of preset analog sounds across the keyboard range. Like Aphex Twin himself, AFX mode is completely unique. It takes this little analog monosynth into completely new, uncharted territory. Without any further ado, let's dive in and see how all this works. Okay, before we get into the nuts and bolts of how to program up in AFX mode, let's just take a moment to consider exactly what it actually means. Now, I'm going to take my preset all the way up to, I think 121 should do it. That should be an initialized preset here on my Base Station. Yep, there we go, we've got our standard sawtooth. And also, the keyboard is currently set to the center range of all of the MIDI notes available on the Base Station 2. Effectively, this is where AFX mode sits and works, and we use a system called overlays to overlay an individual sound on each one of the 25 notes here in the center range of the keyboard. Of course, I have my octave buttons here, and I can move up and down the different octave ranges, but if I press octave up and down together, we should get 0 here on the LED display, and that tells me now I'm in exactly the center point of the keyboard range, and this is exactly now where AFX mode will work. So I mentioned the word overlays, and that's exactly how we work with AFX mode, and I need to turn on an overlay here to be able to program up in AFX mode. So I press function, tap the swing key twice, and you'll see we have the letter O and then a value next to it, and I can choose from one of my 8 overlay tables available to me here in AFX mode. Now I'm going to choose table number 7 because I know this is completely empty and hasn't been programmed up just yet. Now I've opened up the overlay onto this preset, I can press the exit button and start to build up my sounds. As I say, the whole point to the overlays here in AFX mode is for us to allow an individual sound on each of the keys. So let's program up a kick drum on the sub-oscillator here on the lowest key. Now, one thing that's really important is I need to hold the key down while I make the changes to the controls here. By holding the key down, that allows me to basically load or keep any of the settings I make on the top panel here. There we go, we've got a reasonable kick there. Let's move to this note, which is the initialized patch. It was filtered down a touch, but of course now by holding this key down, I can close off all the oscillators. Let's bring in the noise. Let's change the envelopes. And you see now, we're getting a kind of a reasonable hi-hat sort of sound. Okay, so now we have a kick and a hi-hat. On this next note, let's try and let's make a snare. Okay, on this next note, I'm going to use, again, some of the top panel controls that we have here as well. Let's just get some sort of sound changing. But equally, I can use some of the features available to me on the key menu as well. So for example, maybe I want a retriggered envelope here on this particular note. So if I press and hold the note, press the function button, and now if I tap amp envelope twice to enter in the retrigger mode, now that I'll turn that on, and now you can hear now the amp envelope is being retriggered. Equally, I can use the new feature in the base station 4.14 firmware by tapping through on the amp envelope switch, moving through the retrigger, and now giving it a number of cycles. So let's put it onto 3, and now it's only going to repeat 3 times. That's quite useful for making some nice kind of percussive sounds, maybe even clap sounds as well. Get some nice kind of repeated envelope shapes with that. And of course we've seen there that even though I am programming in AFX mode and I've got this key on the overlay selected, I can still use some of the features available to me on the keyboard menu as well. Okay, so on this sound I'm going to use the latch key, and that's just going to hold the note on while I use the parameters here to really program that up. So let's bring in the sub-oscillator. Equally, I'm now going to retune the sub-oscillator using the new detached sub-oscillator from the oscillator 1 feature and turn the base station into a true 3-oscillator analog monosynth. There we go. Again, I'll just use the envelope shaper here to give a bit of a shape to that. So now. So we've now programmed up 5 individual sounds, but of course I can fill up the whole of this overlay range here. When I've finished my overlay and I'm happy with it, I press function, tap the swing button twice again. This takes me to my overlays page for AFX mode, and when I hit save now, I've saved all of the changes to the sounds that I've made in these keys. Now, of course, the Base Station 2 has a very powerful arpeggiator and sequencer. So let's explore how we can use the AFX mode overlays in conjunction with the arpeggiator and sequencer to get some crazy results. Let's turn on the arpeggiator. I've switched it to the played mode here, and I'm just going to press and hold these bottom 4 keys. I'll latch those on. And of course I can use the rhythm controls here to get a completely different set of rhythms here. I can also use the different arpeggiator shapes here as well. Here's on random, which is always a very nice one with this. Go up and down. I could also go to my sequencer, go to record, choose the sequencer slot I want to record into, and now using the legato and rest switches and the keys down here, program in a specific sequence. So now turn on the sequence, press the key, we can latch that on. Now another great thing that we can do with the AFX mode is, whilst the sequencer is locally controlling the notes and playing the notes, I can also send in a MIDI signal from an external device, and this, as long as I'm set to have my arpeggiator to only output rather than react to input, this will allow me to play the existing preset sound over the overlay, effectively turning Bass Station 2 into a two-voice monosynth. And alongside this, I can also protect my overlay so that any parameter changes I make here are not going to affect the overlay. If I press Function and tap the Sequence Retrigger button twice, I'm now in Overlay Protect mode. I'll turn it on here with the values, and now any parameter changes I make here are not going to be affected over the overlay sounds. But of course, all of the patch sounds are completely controllable by everything that we've got on the Bass Station, so I can start to use the parameters and really start to shape around the sound while the overlays are nice and static. Alongside this, of course, I can take off the overlay protection, and now I can use the panel controls to start to shape around and play around with those drum sounds that I've already created. If I want to bring them back in, I can just go to my overlays menu, tap swing twice, and load in the original overlay again. This is a great way for building up and playing around and messing around with the sounds, but dropping them back into a kind of a regular, more tempered sound. When I'm happy with all of my overlays and my patch sounds, of course I can hit the save button here. Now that preset has all of the new sounds and is also going to be looking at overlay table number 7 each time I choose that particular patch. As if AFX mode wasn't enough, we've also added a couple of other really fantastic features for the Bass Station 4.14 firmware update. These include fixed envelope duration, and this is really useful if you're programming up drum sounds. Let's take a quick look. I mean, if here is just a straightforward sound, let's just get some noise, and let's just get a bit of a sound there. Now this is just going to be basically kind of like a hi-hat sort of sound. If I press quickly, the note stops. Now obviously if I want to trigger that as a hi-hat sound, obviously it needs to naturally ring out, and you can see the envelope shape that we've got here. Now, if I press Function and Amp Envelope, and I press it 4 times, and this takes me to D0. And in this menu, basically, if I turn this on now, we're on a fixed envelope length. So even if I press very quickly, we're going to get the whole of that sound playing. Now, the sustain level is basically the value of where the amplifier in this instance, and indeed the mod envelope, because we're switched down here, will be. So that will be the final value. And the release will act as the kind of decay stage, if you like. And the decay itself now is no longer part of the envelope shape, but rather the decay value here is a duration for how long the sustain is on. So if we put it on full, we get a really long sustain before the release. If we bring that right down, we get a much snappier kind of sound. If we go all the way down to the bottom, we get a much snappier sound. So that's the fixed duration envelope feature. Another fantastic new feature that has been added to the base station in the 4.14 firmware update is the ability now to treat the sub-oscillator completely independently from oscillator 1. Base station 2 has always had two powerful oscillators that you can control using the oscillator select switch here and then access the parameters. But the sub-oscillator has traditionally always tracked oscillator 1. So, and if I change the pitch here of oscillator 1, you can hear the sub-oscillator tracking that. Now, if I press and latch this key down, by holding the function button, I can now take control of the pitch of the sub-oscillator. Let's put it onto a square so we can hear what's going on. And now if I take my finger off the function control and use the same coarse pitch knob, I can now of course tune up oscillator 1. Let's switch to oscillator 2, bring up the volume. There we go. So now we have three independently tuned oscillators. One thing to note, if I tune up my sub-oscillator and it goes to the 0 point, you'll notice it immediately jumps to the same value as oscillator 1. And we'll start tracking with oscillator 1 again. That's regardless of whatever pitch value oscillator 1 is set to. Again, if I move to 0, I'm basically reattaching the sub-oscillator to oscillator 1. So alongside all the other fantastic features that have been added with the 4.14 firmware update, we've also added oscillator glide diverge. Let's turn up oscillator 1 and 2, just detune a little and bring the filter down. Bring it up a touch more, yeah. And now, if I apply the glide time, you can hear oscillator 1 and 2 have exactly the same glide period. They're going to take the same time to get to the next note. Now, if I press function and tap input gain twice, I get into my glide diverge page. So I'll put this figure all the way to the top, and this will give me the largest divergence in the glide. And you'll see now, as I glide down to the low note, you can hear oscillator 2 takes a long time to get there. If I go to a high note again, you can hear the separate glide times to reach the destination note. Again, I can double tap the input gain switch to access the glide diverge feature and dial in the amount of glide diverge I want.
So there we have it, a good look at the brand new powerful features that have been added to Base Station 2 in the 4.14 firmware update. AFX Mode and our collaboration with Aphex Twin, one of the most influential electronic musicians, has been very exciting indeed, and we've really changed the sonic possibilities of what this synth can do. Thanks to Richard D. James, Matt Speed and the rest of the Novation team, AFX Mode is a lot of fun. We're incredibly excited to see what you folks are able to produce with it. So thanks very much indeed for watching.